Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the soundbites. To my left is Ben Kinsley, who is co-producer, co-sponsor, and something else. I forget what I always said.
Lots of titles.
A lot of titles. But anyway, Ben, could you explain your business?
Sure. Yeah, I have a consulting firm called Imperium Advisors, and we do a whole bunch of different things related to policy development, advocacy work, communications. So mostly for nonprofits. So
great.
If you have a nonprofit,
give them a call.
Give us a call.
That's great. Thank you very much. And our very special guest today, I'm very excited, a repeat performer here, Congressman Peter Welch. Peter, I'm so thrilled that you're here. Welcome.
Pat, it's really, really good to be with you.
Thank
you. Like the old days when we were in the State House together.
Yes, we have a deal about that on this show, though, Peter.
Okay.
No stories.
No stories. Oh, no stories about Pat.
No stories about me. I don't care. I'll tell stories about Peter, but no stories about
the things I know.
Yes, he does. I was even younger.
I'll buy you coffee after. We'll talk about
There's been a few people on this show that could embarrass the heck out of me. Anyway, we've asked the congressman here and for the show, and I wanted to split it into two sections. One is to talk about the bills and the things that you're doing for making laws and passing on, particularly as it might relate to Vermont. And the second part of the show, we wanted to focus on all of the things that are going on in Washington relating to President Trump. So, which has been a big discussion, as I'm sure here in Vermont, but every other state in this nation. So, we were just talking before the show. You're on 4 committee assignments?
Well, I'm on 3 committees.
Oh, 3 committees.
I'm on the Intelligence Committee.
Right.
I'm on the Oversight and Reform Committee. And I'm on the Energy and Commerce Committee.
Wow.
So most members would probably only have a lot of members only have one assignment. Energy and Commerce is considered a committee where if you're on that, it takes so much time you can't be on others, but I've been on Oversight for years.
Wow.
And then this last year, I got appointed to the Intelligence Committee, and obviously that became extremely active with the whole impeachment.
For sure, that's
Lots
why we
of things
wanted
going through that committee right now.
Yes, right,
Yeah.
which was, I was sort of glad you were there. I said, oh, we know somebody who's on that.
Familiar face.
To get the inside scoop.
Watching C-SPAN.
And then you were telling me about these other committees. I counted 45 on your 46 actually on your website, but
they're caucuses. So there'll be members of Congress who take a particular interest in a certain issue, like let's say diabetes, or the Climate Solutions Caucus, which is one I'm on, and the Dairy Caucus, which is one I'm on. Those don't have regular committee meetings, and they really don't have staff. What they are members of Congress who want to work together when there's an opportunity to advance something related to the purpose of that caucus. So for instance, the Dairy Caucus, which I've been co-chair with Joe Courtney from Connecticut, the whole USMCA, the trade agreement with Mexico and Canada, there's a big issue for our dairy farmers about getting access to the Canadian market. So we would do letters in advocacy to the folks involved in that negotiation, urging that the U.S. position be to provide more access to our dairy farmers.
Dairy farmers need help. It's really sad.
And then the other, when the Ag Committee was considering the renewal of the Ag Bill, a lot of us are not on the Ag Committee. I was for 2 years. But the Dairy Caucus wrote letters and spoke to Ag Committee members and the chair about the margin protection program. It's not enough for our farmers, but we're better with it than without it. So these caucuses where there's 45, I mean, obviously you couldn't be going to 45 different committee meetings and having staff and all of that.
I was saying you must have the best staff in the world to figure out where you should be.
Well, I do have that.
Yes,
I do have that.
But
not enough for 45 committees. So those are very specific. As the sports person caucus, for instance.
Oh, right.
What are issues that come up related to hunting, fishing, outdoor activity? Mm-hmm. So those are what I find really helpful about those caucuses is if something comes up. Let's say I hear from Vermont farmers about a concern they have, and I heard a lot about wanting to get access to the Canadian dairy market because we've been shut out.
Right.
Well, then I would have a number of my colleagues that I could go to and say, hey, I heard about this. Can we do this letter? and they're sort of ready to go. So that's the purpose of the caucus. It's for advocacy on an issue where a lot of us, and these are bipartisan, Pat. And that gives it a little additional heft.
I would think so, because the issues that you've been talking about, diabetes, that can't be
exactly.
Can't be a party.
If that's a partisan issue, we're in trouble.
Right?
Right.
And it said you were the founder of the Congressional Dairy Farmers Market, and not only just co-chair.
Right. That's correct.
Great.
Right. When I got there,
yeah.
I mean, it's been traditional in Vermont that our member of Congress has really paid attention to dairy.
For sure.
You know, Jim Jeffords
Right.
Was a big advocate.
Right.
He had this job before I did. Bernie had it. So when I got there, that dairy caucus was really helpful. And then I served for 2 years on the Ag Committee when we were doing
That's
one
great.
of the farm bills.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, and the other big trade agreement too, the China trade agreement also has a dairy component to it.
That's right.
As well, right?
Well, we're getting hammered by the tariffs with China, and they're still in place even with this Phase 1 agreement. But you know, in retaliation, when President Trump imposed those tariffs on China, they retaliated, and the target of the Chinese retaliation is really our ag industry, and the concentration has generally been the Midwest, where it's a lot of soy and corn, that had been sold.
Right.
But it also really affected dairy. Like, for instance, Cabot Creamery, that's so important to us and our dairy farmers. They used to sell their whey, that byproduct from making cheese. They used to sell that to China, and it's a high-protein product.
Yep.
And this is, by the way, an incredible story, because I remember when I was first in the State House with Governor Snelling, whey, which was a byproduct, you had to dispose of.
Right.
It had no value. In fact, it was a big cost. And I remember he was championing a whey treatment plant. Well, the farmers and folks figured out how to make whey into a useful commodity. And our big market was China. And once those tariffs came in, we lost that. And that's millions of dollars in lost revenue to our farmers through Cabot Creamery. So that part hasn't been solved.
Yeah,
I remember somehow I was involved with one of my jobs, I can't remember which, with the Whey Commission.
Right.
And I went, what is whey?
Well,
and I'm so glad that they've turned that into something profitable.
well, it's extraordinary, and it's, you know, the only way. It's so tough for dairy. I mean, I know how much you care about it too, Pat.
For sure.
But it's so tough for dairy. The price of milk has been going down. You know, and instead we used to have these cycles up and down. Now it's just down, and you've got to get more markets. That's why the USMCA is good for dairy, because we'll have some access to the Canadian market. But also you've got to find ways to enhance the value of the milk itself. And if you can make cheese, that's really been a good industry for us. But if you can then take that byproduct whey, and instead of having to pay to dispose of it, you can get people to pay you to buy it.
Right.
That's what you got to do.
Yeah, it's definitely resourceful, if nothing else, and kind of a good success story. So there's a bunch of issues that we should talk about, and Pat kind of alluded to some of those. We'll get some of the bigger ones later on here, but you're also a leading advocate in the House for investing in energy efficiency to create jobs, cut energy bills, reduce carbon emissions. What kinds of things are you working on with that right now?
Well, first of all, again, this is a bipartisan effort. Huge debate in Congress about climate, right?
Right.
And we've got some folks who are climate deniers, and with all due respect, President Trump is not exactly leading the charge to try to address climate change. And some of that politics is the division in this country from folks who live in carbon-producing states, oil and coal and gas, versus some of us who don't and are not from those states. I do believe that it's absolutely urgent that we address climate change in a very ambitious way, and we're not doing what we need to. But if we're going to reduce carbon emissions down to zero, hopefully, 40% of that can be achieved through efficiency. And what I've found is that politically, I can talk to a lot of my colleagues, like from Kentucky or for West Virginia, where they still have active coal mines. And we don't argue about the fuel source, we actually can work together on energy efficiency, where whatever fuel you're using, if you use less, you're going to save money.
Right.
And to use less, oftentimes you have to employ local contractors to like tighten up homes.
Yeah, right. The
make the buildings
weatherization.
more weatherization,
Yep.
make buildings more efficient, so you get local jobs. By the way, you reduce carbon emissions. So it's been an area that I focused on in part because it's an area where I can get bipartisan support. So some of the bills that you asked, the Homes Act, where we want to get incentives in the form of tax credits for a homeowner who puts money into retrofitting his or her home,
Right.
their home.
Right.
All right, and that means that's all local jobs, one of the things I really like about it. Another one is legislation that we've passed and actually was signed by President Obama, but I'm continuing to try to improve it, again with my Republican colleagues, where the federal government, which owns more real estate than anybody and more buildings than anybody,
Yeah.
can enter into a contract with a contractor, a large company or a small company, to make a, say, federal building energy efficient. So the company will come in,
Cool.
review it, say, here's the things that need to be done to make it tight and efficient. And we the taxpayers don't pay anything.
Oh, we like that.
Pay through the savings that are achieved
That's
when
clever.
the contractor
Yeah, that's a good idea.
finishes the work. So you can actually do that audit, and then you can get a real before and after. So your bill before was 2x, and now
Right.
it's X. Well, that difference is how we pay back the contractor who's put the money up front and done the work. So that's like a practical thing
sure.
that
A
people
win-win,
don't
as they
associate.
say.
We don't associate practical things with Washington.
That's clever.
Yeah, I like
How
that.
have we not heard about this?
Yeah.
Yeah,
We
well,
should
but
trickle
because
down to
it's
here.
not it's not all the controversy. It's
Right.
not all impeachment
Right,
and
right.
the latest tweet and all that
That's a
stuff.
great idea.
So there's a lot of things that we can do that are not constantly in the news because these higher profile things involving the president
Right.
always dominate.
Yeah.
But there's practical steps you can take. So those are a couple of things we've done on energy efficiency. And as I say, that's the committee. My Energy and Commerce Committee has jurisdiction over that. And what I found in the past several years is that there's a real opportunity to do meaningful things with my Republican colleagues when it comes to things like energy efficiency.
Right.
I think we have to do way more. I mean, I think we have to really be managing the grid. We have to have local production, localized production of energy. We've got to get battery technology so we can
Right.
charge our hopefully electric cars up.
So that's something that's actually interesting that you mentioned, local production of energy. In a former life, I studied electrical engineering, and what amazed me, probably more than anything else about the way that electricity behaves, is how much more power you have to generate in order to transmit across a distance. If you double the distance from the generator to where it's being consumed,
Right.
you have to multiply the power you're generating by 4.
Wow.
Whoa.
So it's not a linear thing. Like
You
it's-
lose a lot. There's a lot of inefficiency.
There's
Right,
a lot of
right.
inefficiency with transmitting power. So
Right.
the
Interesting.
further away the source, it's exponentially more power you have to generate to push it through that line.
That sort of makes sense, but I never thought about it.
Yeah.
4 times.
Yeah. So
Well,
it's,
That's a lot.
it's one of the big challenges because in order to get off fossil fuels, we really have to get off of the total dependence on these big local generators
Right.
that have to distribute over vast areas.
Right.
Okay. And Green Mountain Power has been doing a lot of work in trying to create these
Yeah.
microgrids, and it deals with the efficiency that
Right.
you just mentioned, Ben. But it really does. This is what's so difficult making the transition because we've got this grid out there that needs to be modernized
Right,
to accommodate in those situations where we are transmitting, let's say, wind across a long area,
Yep.
but also where it's smaller and can accommodate local networks of production. So that's the kind of thing we have to
Yeah.
do, and we have to get away from these big centralized power generating stations that have traditionally depended on fossil fuels, and that means trying to get much more of a local capacity to.
I don't know if you know the name
generate.
Meredith Angwin. She's been on our show, and she's giving a presentation down in New Hampshire about, she says, if we keep doing what we're doing now without any changes, we're going to have rolling blackouts in a couple
grid
of years,
infrastructure is not gonna handle
because
it.
of the
Right.
grid and just, it's working too hard, and it's going to do some rolling blackouts for us. And so I was going to go down and listen to her,
Yeah.
because she's our resident nuclear physicist.
Well, I want to stay on this for a minute, because what I find difficult and frustrating about our debate on climate is that there's a lot of fear about moving to a clean energy economy, and it's disruptive.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact is, as we use less coal, that affects coal miners in those jobs, and it's tough in coal country. So part of us making the transition has to be to acknowledge that, hey, there's a lot of good folks out there, like coal miners that I visited in West Virginia, and they're incredibly hardworking and really good people, and they kept our lights on. They didn't cause climate change.
Right.
But we have to transition. So part of that transition has to be to acknowledge that we've got to help those communities
them,
out,
right.
help those folks out,
Yeah.
and get better jobs to replace this. But if we do it with that spirit, we can see this challenge that we have to face on climate change is an opportunity. Because when we're talking about like these local grids and local production,
Solar panel installation.
Right,
or
exactly.
energy efficiency, that's a way to build an economy.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's saying that, hey, we've got a problem, but we're not going to put our head in the sand. We're going to try to solve it. But in the solving of it, we actually can create a stronger economy. That's my view. And that's where we have to be, where we're not arguing about you're trying to take my job away. We're acknowledging there's a problem with the carbon emissions.
And give them a plan
and saying,
B
how
to
do we
fall
do
back
it?
on.
Well, so the great
Exactly.
a great example of this really is what Elon Musk has done.
Yeah.
He's
everyone
amazing.
talks about Tesla and SpaceX as being like these huge innovative companies. Tesla still hasn't made a dollar, but I'll come back to that in a second. But the third company that he has is a solar installation company, and that one is hugely popular. It's now the largest solar company in the U.S., and that's where most of the revenues are that are funding these other two businesses that he runs. And that is an industry that's creating a phenomenal amount of jobs, to your point, and addressing climate change. And what's really interesting, if you look at the third quarter earnings reports, or fourth quarter earnings reports just came out for Tesla and all the other large car manufacturers, and Tesla's valuation is now beat every single other domestic car manufacturer.
I saw
They're
that.
bigger than
That's
Ford, bigger than Chevy.
Wow.
All of them. And that is telling, because that means that Wall Street is betting on them. They're betting that Tesla is going to succeed, that it's going to be bigger than Ford, it's going to be bigger than Chevy, it's going to be bigger than
Some
Volkswagen.
place to put our money on stocks, eh?
Exactly.
You heard it here.
No, but Ben's you've got a good point here. That's an industry, all right? And do we want to be in the forefront of that, where we're manufacturing that product? And of course, it also acknowledges that our biggest challenge with carbon emissions, particularly in Vermont, is in transportation.
Right, exactly.
And heating.
Yep.
We're pretty good on our electricity. It's basically all renewable. That includes Hydro-Quebec.
Right.
So our electricity is good, but we're dependent on fossil fuels for transportation and heating. So you get electric cars in the mix. That are then the batteries are charged by renewable electricity.
And they've changed so much over the years. I mean, it's amazing.
Right.
The cars now. I think what happens here in Vermont, and I'm one of them to a certain extent, that we're being a little selfish because we look at Vermont and say, no matter what we do, it won't budge the needle 1 inch globally. I mean, it won't change a thing, so what are we doing? Why are we doing these changes? And I think somehow, and I'm one of them, I think somehow we've got to get beyond that and understand what we are doing globally.
Right.
Because I don't think Vermonters are digging down, and they don't want to spend money on carbon tax. They don't want any more taxes.
But there's ways. You know what? There's two challenges here. There's there's a practical implementation challenge. I mean, if you're paycheck to paycheck,
right.
and you get
Right.
a boost in expense, the price of gas goes up, the price of groceries go up, you
Right.
get a dentist bill you weren't expecting, that's tough.
Right.
So let's acknowledge it. So how we do it is really important in a pragmatic way. But in what I'm saying is that if we look for the pragmatic way, it can actually be something, in my view, and I think experience shows, where
Right.
we're going to boost the economy.
Right.
You know, Tesla's an example. That's helping create a new market. But
Right.
a Tesla's
Whole new market.
really expensive. Most Vermonters can't afford a Tesla, all right? That doesn't mean the Teslas are bad. They're a limited market. But what you hope with that is that as the technology
it'll
gets
get
more and more
more-
developed, the price goes down.
Right.
And then can we get an affordable truck? You know,
Right.
Vermonters love trucks.
Yes, we do.
Right, and you want a good, strong truck.
Right.
Has power, gets the job done. But we've got to get the technology, so, you know, a Vermonter would be fine, I think, with a solid truck that was getting the job done, that was
Right.
powered by renewable electricity as opposed to
F-150,
gas.
Ford's making one.
Yeah,
Oh, are
Ford's
they
making
really?
one.
Oh.
Yeah, yep.
Oh, it's cool.
Right.
So can we switch into a little subject that's near and dear to my heart?
Yep.
Because I read that you said that you strongly believe that we can enact, I'm reading this because I want to get, that we can enact common sense gun safety reform without undermining Second Amendment rights.
Well, I do believe that.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for that. What do you think is a solution? Because we've got bills already this year after last year's fiasco.
You know, I think the bottom line here, and I know you're a strong advocate for Second Amendment rights. I know that, and I respect that. But you don't want dangerous people to have a gun.
Nope.
Right?
Right, and I know the mental health issue is important.
The mental
but
health issue
how
is
you
important.
solve that is a really tricky thing to do.
It is, but you know, I don't know if we disagree or not, but I think a background check is really important.
Yeah.
Okay, and I don't think that's intrusive.
No, I had one for my gun, and I took. By the time I turned around
5
to
minutes.
put the gun back in the box, it was done. So it's not intrusive.
Well, especially given your background.
Exactly.
Oh, Commissioner of
No,
DMV, check,
that's
okay.
no, seriously, it took 10 minutes. I mean, not even 10
Well,
minutes.
this is my point, because what I found, in Vermont, and I was in the State House when you were there. There's, I think, a real apprehension from some gun owners that use their guns responsibly,
Right.
that teach their kids hunter safety, and where the use of firearms is for hunting, and it's all responsible, and and there's good family activity around deer camp and other of the rituals that have
The
been so
second
important in
week of
Vermont.
deer camp, there's a song about that.
But my point is that a lot of times I've seen folks are worried that if you do something that's reasonable to achieve this goal, that gun owners also share that people who are dangerous shouldn't have guns.
Right.
Okay, domestic abusers,
Right.
criminals.
I agree with that.
Okay, people with significant mental health issues, that they're okay, but their apprehension is if you do anything at all that restricts access to
it'll
guns,
start.
It's
then
the slippery
It's
slope
the
argument.
slippery
Right,
slope.
no, I
Yeah.
understand that.
So people fear that, but what I've seen in policy is that there's always a fear of the slippery slope. I mean, it's not just around
Sure.
guns. It's
Everything.
around, all right, if we start having health care for some people,
Right.
does that mean we're going to have health care for all? Well, I actually think we should have
Yeah.
health care for
I agree
everybody,
with that,
okay?
sort of.
But it's a step-by-step process where you have to make that debate and have that policy argument about what makes sense to achieve that goal of gun
Right.
safety
Right.
as opposed to gun restriction, okay? So background checks, I do not believe that military-style weapons, we can get into the debate about that, but some of these weapons at high capacity that are used by our soldiers should be in the easily available in the hands of people who, when they're used, I mean, look, in 30 seconds you can kill 100 people.
Right.
So, and then these high capacities where there's like 50 bullets in a magazine.
Yeah, right. Just
So those are things that I think are totally reasonable and responsible and would start to go a long way to address what is a growing problem in this society.
The thing here in Vermont is we are the second safest state in the nation with guns. And that's always in somebody's mind. What are we doing?
Right.
We know how to be responsible. I love on Facebook, there's an attorney, I know you know, he takes his son out, and he is so, I mean, you could just feel his pride when he takes his son out, and they go hunting, and they're in the tree stand, and he's always posting pictures, and the kid's got a big smile because he's with Dad.
Well, you know what you're saying is near and dear to my heart. There is one of my favorite Vermonters I spent a lot of time with in Heartland, who's since passed away, Avery Howe.
Oh,
but
yes.
Did you know Avery?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, well, he led a lot of the hunter safety. He's the kind of man that you could possibly have, and he loved teaching kids hunter safety. And what I also saw is that he loved teaching kids about nature. They're out walking in the woods. This is good stuff.
Yeah.
So you don't want to interfere with that.
Right.
I'm in agreement. But, you know, even though we're this safe state, things are happening that are really scary for parents. Like what happened down in Fairhaven, you know, which moved the governor to a sign.
Right.
I went down there after.
Oh, did you?
And we were so lucky, because keep in mind what happened in Florida, just like I think the day before.
Right.
And the police down there were slow to respond. There were signals. Up here, within 10 minutes of that mom giving a call, I think to the police,
Right.
there were eyes on this kid.
Right.
And the school personnel and officials went into action. Our state police were fantastic, and the local police in this case were fantastic.
Right.
And they were literally watching this kid, and then they eventually arrested him. But when I went to the meeting in Fairhaven with the police and the superintendent and the school principals, in the school safety officer, whose name was mentioned as somebody who was going to be targeted, I thought that the parents there were going to be really happy and congratulating their public officials for a job well done. They weren't. And it wasn't that they were mad at them. They had lost that confidence that when they dropped their child off at school, or when they said goodbye as they put their child on the bus, that that child was safe.
Yeah.
And that security that a parent needs was shattered for them.
Yeah.
And I think that's what moved the governor to support some gun safety legislation.
Because I think the see something, say something actually worked. Because he
did work there.
He told a girl or a friend or something, and then she started that whole scenario.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, I just thought our school officials down there were incredible.
Yeah.
And our police response, state and local, was incredible. But that sense of security that all of us want to have, that, hey, we're Vermont, it's a small state, we look after one another,
it's gone.
Yeah, and it can happen anywhere. It just takes one, disturbed person, kid, to do a Me Too kind of...
Who was really thinking about this a long time.
That's my point.
Whoa.
So that's what's I think, understandably led to a desire to take some practical steps to restrict access to guns where a background check would
so, can you ask Peter about that? Because I want to get to the stuff everybody's waiting to hear and talk about.
One quick thing before we leave this topic, though. Do you think that there's going to be federal action on gun safety, or is it going to be continue to be a state by state?
It's definitely state by state. I mean, in the Senate, there's no support for it. We passed, with some bipartisan support, background check legislation, gun safety legislation, and it's in the Senate. Senator McConnell won't take up any legislation from the House, literally. I mean, he just doesn't do it by and large.
It's a strange year this year.
And we've passed over 400 bills in the House, about 260 or more, with solid bipartisan support. That tells you.
Yeah, and he won't take them up?
Montpelier. He won't take them up. He takes up. He took up just a few, like the robocall legislation.
Yes, right. Thank you for that.
People hate those
way.
robocalls.
Yeah,
I hear about that more than anything. And we got an overwhelming vote in the House, and that did go through the Senate.
Right.
But it's few and far between, even on things that are practical, like bringing down the cost of prescription drugs.
Yeah, that's what we wanted to ask you.
Well,
because
go ahead.
I've got a story.
Yeah, we talk about this real quick. So, prescription drugs, and there's some talk about what we can do with generic prescription drugs, and I know you were involved in one of those bills, so maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I'll talk about generics and I'll talk about the name brand drugs. But here's bottom line. We are getting ripped off on how much pharma is charging us. Why is that? It's because they have pricing power. They get a patent, which means that for a period of time, they have exclusive right to sell that medication.
Right.
They abuse the patent. They abuse it in two ways. One is they just ratchet the price up constantly, even though it's not costing them anymore to produce it in year 5 than it did in year 1. And what happens in this, and by the way, President Trump, I met with him in Elijah Cummings in April of 2017 to talk about prescription drugs. Because he got it on the campaign trail.
Yeah.
He said, we're getting ripped off.
For sure.
Pharma's ripping us off. We pay the highest prices in the world. The only way to address that is to have government act as a advocate for the consumer. Because otherwise, the pharmaceutical company sets the price, ratchets up the price, and just inflicts it, that financial punishment on us. We're the only government that doesn't advocate on behalf of its consumers, rather than, whereas what we do is let pharma set the price. So in most major medications, we pay 600, 700, sometimes 800% what the average price is paid in Canada, in England, in France, okay? And the legislation we passed in the House adopted a provision, a proposal that President Trump had made. He said, hey, we shouldn't be suckers. We should be paying what he called the international reference price. In other words, you take the average price that's paid in a half a dozen countries like France and England and Canada and say, hey, we'll pay that. And we took that principle and put it in our legislation that has passed the House. And if that got onto President Trump's desk, it would have to get by Senator McConnell. That would lower the cost of prescription drugs by $500 billion over 10 years, okay? And pharma would still do really, really well with their profits.
Because they're all their excuse. And I worked for Ciba Geigy for 20 years, which is now Novartis.
Right.
I was in the legal department, and they always say it's so expensive to get that drug researched and the patent and all that stuff. So that's what they always say, why they have to charge so much to make up, but I'm not so sure.
Well, then they get 20 years
25 years of profit.
You know what, it is expensive to bring, but the taxpayer, by the way, pays a lot of that expense, because a lot of that original research is done at the National Institute of Health, which is all taxpayer money.
Right.
But the price they set is way beyond what is required to recover that expense of that development.
Right.
Okay, and you just have to look at what we pay versus what every other country pays. And you know, and by the way, Pat, I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat. We can't afford this.
No, I'm right with you.
You know, we just can't. And that's why it's one of the most urgent things that we could do together to show Vermonters and Americans that, hey, we get it. You know, we can't continue to allow pharma to just rip you off.
Recently, I was given a pill given prescription by the doctor. Turned out I paid $80 for it, and I called up the state and I said, where's the 80/20? He goes, Pat, that is the 80/20. And I said, how much is this pill? He goes, $400. I said, I can't pay this $400. So I went back to my doctor and I said, you're going to have to put me on something else, because I am not spending $400 on medication. So he hooked me up with a compounding company, which gives me the same pill, 3 months, $16.50.
It's unbelievable.
And I checked with the PDR. I looked at the marking on the pill and the marking on the pill and the PDR. I went up to the State House, and I don't want to shoot myself in the foot because I don't want to pay $400. But I said, if my mother, 90 years old, if the doctor told her to get that pill, she would, because the doctor said so. At that age, you just do what the doctor says. She'd do without food and wouldn't tell us, because that's what the doctor said. I was beside myself. I was talking to all the lobbyists and stuff, and how does that happen? That's wrong.
Well, see, it is wrong.
Yeah.
And it's wrong because your mom she didn't have you helping her.
Right.
She needs a government that's going to help her by making certain that the rules don't allow her to be ripped off.
Right.
Okay? And that means we know the pharmaceutical companies have their MO is to just boost the price as much as they can. And to some extent, they try to conceal it because insurance pays some of it, you pay some of it, the taxpayer pays some of it. But it all adds up to this monstrous health care bill. And, for all the debate we're having about health care, the biggest challenge for most employers who want to help their employees out, or your mom, it's the cost.
Right.
And it just never stops going up.
Yeah.
So that's why we've got to have governmental involvement here. And that's what Mitch McConnell is opposed to. But if you have no governmental involvement, you have
I would, if I
free
hadn't
hand.
opened my mouth, which I'm sure you're surprised I did, but I wouldn't have known about a compounding company.
Right.
And $16 versus $400 for 3 months, not 1 month.
And what you did was really great, and it's because you're persistent and you found a workaround.
Right.
But my view, and good for you.
Yeah, but that should be for everybody. I shouldn't have to fight with my doctor.
That's exactly right. It should be for everybody.
Right.
I mean, if you need your diabetes medication,
Right.
you shouldn't have to drive to Canada to get something that you can come close to
Because my mother's
affording.
of the same generation. You do what the doctor says. You never, God forbid, you should challenge the doctor. The doctor said so. She would do that. I don't even know if she'd tell us.
Yeah,
it's just.
I want to go
think
back
it's
to Ben's
disgraceful.
question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I didn't answer your generic question. One of the other things where we do have bipartisan support, and Senator Grassley and Senator Leahy are working on this in the Senate. And Senator Grassley, conservative Republican from Iowa, he totally gets how pharma is ripping us off when it comes to generics. What pharma will do, they have a patent for, let's say, 10 years.
Right.
Well, at the end of that 10 years, when the generic is about to come on and there's competition and the price goes down, they'll pay the generic company to keep their lower cost drug off the market for another 2 or 3, 4 years.
Yep.
Is that outrageous?
I didn't know this. Really?
It's called pay for delay.
Wow. Oh, I have
And
to
all of us are
find out
apoplectic about that, including Senator Grassley. So he's gotten a bill through his committee. And this is a story that I like to tell. He got all the Democrats to support it and only 3 Republicans. But even though he's the Republican chair, he moved that bill through because he was on the side of his consumers, the folks in Iowa who are getting hammered by this.
I hadn't heard
and
this.
we passed that in the House, but it hasn't gotten to the president's desk yet. Because, again, McConnell is holding it up. He won't let the Senate have a full vote on it. And I think that's just outrageous. Grassley gets it.
Sorry, he'll be.
But that's an example. And then the other thing the pharmaceutical companies do, they get a pill. They get a patent for it. But then as you get close to the expiration of the patent, they'll make this tiny little adjustment. It's called evergreening, where they might change the color, or they might change a molecule. I mean, something that therapeutically wouldn't make a difference whether your mother was taking the pill of Friday or Saturday, okay? And they'll then apply for a new patent to get that continuation of their pricing power. So the stuff that's going on with the pharma, it's outrageous.
Yeah.
And the only way to address that is through the government working on behalf of your mom and other consumers.
Well, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that you're involved in. We don't have time to talk about all of it, unfortunately.
We'll have to have you come back.
But things like, I'll just mention a couple of them that are on your website, but robocalls, affordable health care, elections, I talked about gun safety, and veterans issues, affordable college, reforming the tax code, all stuff that you're involved in. What's the best place for our viewers to go kind of catch up and see what you're working on?
Well, you can go to my website, welch.house.gov.
It's an excellent website.
Thank you. But the real big challenge for us in Washington is to make the government start working more for everyday people and less for powerful corporations. I really think that's it. So all those issues you mentioned, I mean, your mom can't do anything about the cost of her medication. She should have a government that's it's up there for her.
Right.
When it comes to our tax system, these big banks, they just save like $40 billion on their tax bill because of that
They all,
Trump-inspired
speaking
tax
of
cut.
what is it, go around, they know all the loopholes.
Well, no, we just gave them the money with that tax cut that was passed.
Did we?
Yeah, we
Excellent.
lowered the taxes for them, but the tax cut, the way it was designed, it didn't go to your mom, it didn't go to you. You know, it went to J.P. Morgan, it went to Pfizer, it went to the big companies. And that's just raw political power. They had the votes to get that through, you know, and we didn't have enough votes to stop it. But that really makes a difference. You know, the pharma companies, just take pharma for a minute, because we've been on that topic and people know how profitable those companies are. Well, the tax cut gave them billions and billions more profit, even as they continue to raise their prices. That tax cut, we've got to lower the taxes of working people.
Right.
You know, you're always concerned about the cost and the expense, and you're right about that, because Vermonters work really hard.
Yep.
And it's expensive to live here. You know, the heating, transportation, housing is tough.
Food.
And then you get a kid you have a son or daughter who wants to go to college or even some kind of training school.
Right.
Where are you going to get the money to do that?
Right.
And I've seen a lot of families where the parents who were thinking they were going to retire, postpone retirement so they can continue to help, or they thought they'd paid their mortgage off, but they decide to refinance to help their kids through college. You've got to have governmental policies that take the burden off of them instead of taking the burden off of the big banks and the big
I love
pharma
when they may
companies.
settle so many billions of dollars and they don't even blink.
Yeah.
In a lawsuit settlement, they charge them, you know, the penalty is $10 billion and they're okay.
Yeah.
Here's
Or,
a check.
you know, take a look at what just happened with Boeing, all right?
Right.
This guy, Muhlenberg, I guess is his name, he's the CEO, and a lot of evidence coming out that they did shortcuts around the MAX 187, is that what it is?
Yes.
Yeah,
Well,
plain.
and he's the boss. Right? There should be some accountability. Well, he got fired,
Right.
but as he was walking out the door,
Yeah,
they
they
said,
give
oh,
him
by
the
the way,
gold-
here's $64 million.
Oh my God, that golden
The
parachute.
golden parachutes.
I
Yeah,
don't
but
think I have one of those.
That's the ethic that we've got to change.
right.
Okay, so all of those issues that you went through are all about an effort to try to tip the balance a little bit more in favor of everyday working people, as opposed to just continue to shovel benefits, regulatory changes, and everything else to a lot of these large corporations that have just.
I worked
been-
there for 20 years. I feel
Well,
bad.
you should know. You should
No,
know.
but a lot of folks who work there really good. You know, it's
we
not like
work
it's not like you got the golden parachute.
Right. No, I
Okay.
did not actually.
Yeah, in the, you know, it's been great for the shareholders, but for a lot of those employees, in the work is important. Look, I mean, again on pharma, you know,
You do need the drugs.
we need them, and
Right.
they can alleviate pain. They can extend life. They can help provide a cure, and that's good. But they're going to kill us with this price.
Yeah,
So that's where the role of government comes
Yeah,
in, because
right.
it's got to stick up
Clamp
for everyday people.
yeah. Okay.
All right, so
Switch to him. Do this. We got 14
we
minutes here.
spared the best or the biggest for last,
Exactly.
I guess. Yeah. So you were on the House Intelligence Committee,
Right.
which is a committee that kicked off the impeachment process in the House.
Right.
And we are now sitting here in January, 2 days after the House has voted to send those articles of impeachment to the Senate.
Very formal procedure. I
Yes,
didn't
it
realize
was.
that.
Yeah,
My goodness.
marched over.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very formal. This is certainly not the first time. I think there's been
Three.
three that have gone to
precedents.
trial.
I've got, yeah.
Right.
Three that have gone to trial.
And Nixon resigned.
And
That's
Nixon
correct.
resigned before it went to trial.
Right.
So maybe talk. I think you had a moment, which I think made it on all the late night shows, where you basically said, the person who started all this, Donald Trump, should be the one that comes down and talks to us about it.
Right.
And we have not, in the whole, at least the House proceedings, which is not a trial, and some people try to characterize it that way. It's really a findings
it's
process.
solely the Senate.
It's a
Correct.
findings
right.
process. But most notably, Trump and his attorney never agreed to come and testify
Right.
So maybe tell us a little bit about the process from your perspective.
Okay, I will. And first of all, I want to say this is extraordinarily consequential, in my view, for our democracy. Impeachment is an extraordinarily serious remedy because what the Constitution did by providing the House authority to impeach and the Senate authority to try was overturn the outcome of an election. That's very serious. President Trump was elected. He didn't get a majority of the votes, but he won a significant majority in the Electoral College. And that's how our president is determined. So he won. And in my view, it's extraordinarily important to honor and respect electoral outcomes. That's essential for a democracy. But there was a remedy that was put in to be used rarely, and that's the question.
Right.
For conduct, a remedy for conduct in office.
Right.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And I was hesitant to come to the use of impeachment, but ultimately believe that it was our duty.
I think the last time on the show we had talked about it a little bit, and you weren't sure at that point.
That's right.
That was the correct
and
remedy.
And that was the reason. But Ukraine changed it for a lot of us. And what the president did, and what I believe is impeachable, is two things. Number one, he used the power of his office, where he had the authority to actually withhold $391 million in military assistance to Ukraine that had been approved by a strong bipartisan vote to help Ukraine resist Russian aggression, unless the president of Ukraine agreed to announce an investigation into a political rival. Okay, that's what the goal was of President Trump. And what that is, the reason that's such an abuse is that he's using the power of the public trust of a high office and his authority to achieve something that's good for him personally. It's not about our foreign policy, it's about his electoral prospects. And that so-called transcript or readout of the call is very clear. Will you do me a favor, though, or do us a favor, though? And has them talking.
And then 2 hours later is when they yanked the funding.
And then they yanked the funding. So that is, in my view, a gross abuse of power. I put it in very simple terms. Let's say the mayor of a city was talking to the police chief, and the police chief wanted a budget to be submitted to the city council. And the mayor said, I'll submit the budget, but here's what I'd like you to do for us, though. I'd like you to announce that you're doing an investigation into Peter Welch, who's running against me. Okay? We'd be appalled. You're doing what? You won't submit the police budget? They want a few extra cruisers. They need a new person for EMT or whatever, unless I agree as the police chief to announce an investigation that into a political rival.
Well, and in some ways, this is almost worse because it involves international relations.
Yeah, another country.
And one of our allies who's getting hurt by this. It's not even just a domestic issue.
I agree with you. But the reason I brought it down to that example is sometimes when we start talking about foreign policy, a lot of people think that, oh, well, that's not my domain, and the president can do what he wants, and it's all very confusing. It's about foreign policy. Well, it actually is not. It's very simple. You can't use the public trust for personal gain, whether you're a city official, whether you're a member of Congress, and whether you're the president of the United States, and that's what he did. That is what's impeachable, and that was Article 1. The second thing that's impeachable is his obstruction of Congress into the inquiry. And let me step back a minute to explain why I think that's so important. Our democracy's endured for over 240 years. Nobody thought it would. And a reason that it does is we set it up in the Constitution to make it hard to do things. Sometimes we get frustrated with that. Sometimes we get frustrated with that. But the benefit of it is that we've actually had to deal with each other, and nobody has gotten too much power, because power does corrupt.
Right.
All right? And that can be on the Democratic side, it can be on the Republican side. There's a reservation and a caution that we had by our founders to set up a system where it would be tough for somebody to like get all the power. So that's the whole separation of powers. You got the House and the Senate, you legislature, you got the president, and you've got the courts. In all prior impeachment inquiries, when Congress issued subpoenas to get documents relevant to that inquiry, President Nixon turned over documents, President Clinton turned over documents, Andrew Johnson, where there weren't all that many documents, turned over. My point is they turned them over. They produced witnesses. The chief of staff for Nixon testified. The chief of staff for Clinton testified. Trump said Article 2, which is presidential power.
Said no.
Congress is Article 1. He said, no, I don't have to. I can do what I want. Now, that goes to the heart of whether you're going to maintain a system that our founders created.
Separate but equal.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And this is not just about Trump, because let's say we get a Democratic president who says, well, we've got the Trump precedent. I don't have to turn anything over to you.
We can keep going
so
on.
that's what's so essential here. And what's disturbing to me the most about the way Senator McConnell is handling this is that he's not accepting the independent authority that the legislative body in the Senate has. What he has said is that he's going to coordinate this whole thing with the White House counsel. So he's defined his job as protecting the president as opposed to maintaining the system of checks and balances. So that's extremely, extremely alarming to me. So, you know, in Washington, there's a tendency to try to make every issue trivialized by saying it's just partisan politics. And obviously there's a lot of that, and there's some blame on both sides. But some things really matter. Checks and balances matter. The rule of law matters. And, you know, I served in Vermont, as you know, with Republicans and Democrats, and the minority and the majority. And what I've admired, I mean, one of the first governor I served with was Governor Snelling. I mean, he was totally reverential of the Constitution.
He was.
And he wouldn't do things just because he could. He knew there were limits that he had to respect because there'd be future governors and future legislators. And we're losing that in Washington, and we can't afford to lose it. We can't afford to lose that.
Yeah, because if we lose that, if we lose the respect of the Constitution, then
what else do we have?
What else? Exactly. What else do we have?
It's the Wild West, and it's anything goes.
Can I just ask one question? Because what I struggle with is the definition, because I don't think there is one necessarily, of high crimes, and the word misdemeanor is in, with my little limited law enforcement background, a misdemeanor.
Could be anything.
It could be, you know, stubbing your toe. I mean, it's so how does does it go high crimes and misdemeanors? I mean,
well, you know, that is a really good question because there's a lot of confusion about that because a misdemeanor is a minor thing.
Yeah, it's like it's only a misdemeanor. Good.
Right. And historically, something I brushed up on because I was serving on the Intelligence Committee and had to vote. When the founders were talking about should we put impeachment in there, the answer was. They debated that because many said no and ultimately decided yes. And then second, for what? And the terminology then was that they wanted this to be about an abuse of the public trust as opposed to an abuse of your personal responsibility. I mean, it's a real difference between did you abuse your power? And misdemeanor was, I think, had a somewhat significantly different definition.
Yeah, it must have, because it certainly doesn't now.
But it went to the question of whether what you are being impeached for went to an abuse of the trust that you are the beneficiary of when you hold a public office, all right? As opposed to a standard criminal offense, let's say drunk driving, or you assaulted somebody. I mean, that could go through the regular criminal justice system. So I think misdemeanor really had a different definition then, and I think, as I understand it, and this really is the way I approached this impeachment, was it the use of his power to achieve something that was for his personal benefit. That's what
Right.
really makes
and
a
that's the
difference.
high crime part.
Well,
of
so the
misdemeanor
high
part.
is interesting because if you look at these, there's a lot of different ways to read some of these letters, but that because they basically it's played out in the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers to some degree. And one of the things that James Madison had argued for the fact of one of the things that he'd argued when he was arguing for the including impeachment in the
Right.
document was that what if, and the example he gave, what if the president coordinated with a foreign power to win an election, to steal?
Yeah, that's
that
right.
was literally one of
Right.
the examples that he gave for why we need impeachment.
Right.
And they're like, oh yeah, like you're absolutely right, because
Right.
you're coming from a point in history, right, where they just fought a war to get rid of a monarchy, right?
Right.
And they did it with the help of the French, but they had a very love-hate relationship with the French. They were like,
Right.
give us money and support, and you're fighting a war with English, so you're kind of our, the enemy of our enemy is our friend type of deal. And so they still did not trust the French or any of the other European powers, and that's the time frame that they were in when they wrote that. They were like,
Right.
we don't want one of these European
Right.
countries coming in and
take it
basically
over.
installing
Right.
a figurehead.
Right.
Because we
Right.
just got out of that.
Right.
And that's
Well,
exactly
that's
what
a
they
good
were
point.
afraid of.
So you've got
Yeah.
that election.
So there isn't anything written anywhere of what the definition of high crimes and misdemeanor. It's really just an understanding of what the founders
Well, there's
might have thought back then.
it's what Ben's talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah,
There's
exactly.
There's
There's
a
a history,
historical perspective,
right.
and a lot of folks have like you have read those Federalist
Right.
papers. But it certainly isn't, misdemeanor is, from law enforcement in Vermont,
Right.
is, I think, any offense for which the prison term is less than a year, or is it 2 years? I'm not sure.
I think it's a year.
Is it a year?
so.
All right, so it's a minor.
Right.
It's a minor offense, but the heart of this, and it's created a lot of confusion. The heart of this is exactly what Ben is saying. Was there a use of the authority that you are the beneficiary of,
Right.
through a public that trusts you,
Right.
for private gain? And in this case, it goes back to the roots of the concern
Right.
that our
Right.
founders
Which
had
makes
of
sense when
foreign
they're
interference.
hearing
And the other thing that's so disturbing to me is that we do have a problem with electoral interference. That when I was talking to when I questioned Director Mueller,
Oh,
you may
right,
remember
after
this,
his
but
report.
well, he did his
Yeah.
report and was talking very definitively about the incredible amount of interference that
Right.
Russia was doing.
Could you explain that? What interference? Were they messing with the numbers?
No, it wasn't
It was more
messing-
advertising, false.
What they did was they hacked into the the DNC, the Democratic
Right, I
National
remember
Committee
that, right.
servers, and they got emails from a lot of they got a lot of emails.
Oh.
So they stole that information. They then gave it to Wikipedia, and then Wikipedia
right.
doled that out.
Right, and started
that-
all kinds of.
that just created the gossip trail.
Right, okay.
And changed what was being discussed and debated. So it was computer hacking,
Right.
and then systemic releasing of. There was nothing damaging. It was embarrassing.
turmoil.
It's email stuff,
Right.
where right, and then they were trying to hack into Hillary's email as well.
Yeah.
I hate to say this.
And they also, the second thing they did is, this is what happens in social media now. They created these fake accounts and created a lot of fake stories.
Right.
And the way it is working on social media now is a lot of people believe that stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure. Yeah.
It's hard to tell.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. We ran out of time. I told
All
you
right.
the hour would go fast. I
You're
really
right.
appreciate your coming. Thank you very much.
It's great.
I know you
interviewers.
enjoyed this show. We'll see you next week, and in the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites.